The gravy simmered on the stove and the smell of turkey filled our Bellevue home when my phone buzzed against the counter. An unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the message walk away immediately. Say nothing to anyone, especially your father. My stomach dropped. Through the window, I caught sight of a black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the gray Washington sky. It had been there all morning. Too still, too deliberate. I looked toward the dining room where my stepmother Linda hummed over silverware pretending everything was normal. My hands went numb. I couldn't breathe. My name is Emily. And before I tell you what really happened that night, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt the weight of family secrets pressing down on you. I grew up believing my father was invincible. Richard Carter, the man who taught me how to ride a bike on the quiet streets of Bellevue, who once stayed up until 2 in the morning, helping me finish a science project, who used to say, "Emily, as long as you tell the truth, the world can't break you." When my mother died in a car accident during my senior year of high school, I thought his voice would be the anchor that kept me from drifting into despair. He remarried only 6 months later to Linda, a woman just 15 years older than me. That wound never fully healed. Still, I tried. I wanted to believe he deserved happiness, that maybe she could fill the hollow space my mother's absence had carved. But from the start, something shifted. The man who once laughed easily, who told me stories of working his way up from nothing, began closing doors behind him. His study was no longer a place where I could wander in and ask questions. His phone calls grew hushed, his tone clipped, and whenever I entered the room, he'd end the conversation with a sharp, "I'll call you back." I told myself it was grief, that maybe we both handled it differently. So I poured myself into school, into work, into silent acts of sacrifice no one asked for, but that I gave anyway. I lived at home to save money, commuting 3 days a week to the University of Washington in Seattle, where I studied criminal justice. Between classes and my part-time job at an accounting firm in downtown Bellevue, I helped keep the household running. I bought groceries when Linda forgot. I fixed the printer when Dad cursed at it. I stayed up late folding laundry that wasn't mine. Every time I hoped it might be noticed, it wasn't. One night, Linda scolded me for leaving my criminology textbook on the counter, saying it made the house look cluttered before her friends arrived. She didn't mention the lasagna I had cooked, or the table I had set, or the fact that I had driven to SeaTac Airport to pick up her cousin that afternoon. I swallowed it. Again. Because somewhere inside me lived the fragile hope that if I just kept being useful, if I just kept carrying the weight without complaint, maybe Dad would smile at me like he used to. Maybe he would say he was proud, but instead he began asking me strange questions. "Emily, for my accountant. I need to know all the places your name might be listed. Bank accounts, credit cards, business associations. Emily, could you apply for a business credit card? Just for emergencies. It'll build your credit. Emily, these papers are for your college loans. Just sign here. Don't worry about the fine print." I told myself it was harmless. After all, he was my father. If you can't trust your father, who can you trust? Still unease threaded itself through me, especially when his business partner Anthony Russo visited. He had a way of looking at me too long, like he was assessing something I couldn't name. His cologne lingered after he left Sharp Chemical unpleasant. And the moment the door closed, my father would retreat into his office with him, voices low, papers shuffling, locks clicking into place. Even Linda seemed uneasy. I caught her hands trembling as she arranged dinner plates, once her gaze darting toward the office where Richard's voice rose and fell like waves against a cliff. I wanted to believe her clipped tone toward me was just insecurity, that maybe she didn't know how to be a stepmother. I wanted to believe my father's paranoia was simply grief or stress from the business. That fragile hope kept me loyal long after the evidence suggested I shouldn't be. I would sit on the bus to Seattle at 6:00 a.m., earbuds in, staring out at the mist rolling over Lake Washington, rehearsing excuses for him in my head. "He's tired. He works too hard. He's just protecting us." But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was rotting beneath the polished surface of our family. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every holiday became a performance. Crystal glasses, perfectly basted turkey, laughter that felt scripted. My father at the head of the table, raising his glass with a practiced smile that no longer reached his eyes, and me, silently waiting for him to look at me and see his daughter instead of an obligation. But one moment changed everything. Thanksgiving dinner in our Bellevue house always looked like a magazine spread. The dining room glowed with the soft gold of the chandelier. The china plates gleamed, crystal glasses sparkled, and the roasted turkey sat in the center of the table like a centerpiece in a holiday catalog. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt staged, like a show we were all forced to act in. I slid into my seat, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. Linda carved the turkey with a hostess's precision, her smile stretched too tight, her shoulders tense. Aunt Martha fussed with the cranberry sauce she'd brought from Tacoma. Uncle Charles loosened his tie and cracked a joke about traffic, and my cousin Lily buried herself in her phone. Ordinary family moments, ordinary laughter, but nothing felt ordinary to me. Not after the messages. The phone on my lap buzzed again. I glanced down, shielding the screen from the others. FBI agents in position. Do not go back downstairs once you leave. Your life depends on it. My fork froze mid-air. The words burned into me. My life depends on it. I forced myself to chew slowly, to nod at Lily's story about her school play, even as my pulse pounded in my ears. Across the table, my father lifted his wine glass. Richard Carter, suave, commanding every inch, the businessman host. I'm thankful he set his voice warm for my beautiful family, for another successful year in business, and for the opportunities that lie ahead. That last word, opportunities, caught like a shard of glass in my throat. I had heard him use that word on the phone at 2 a.m., speaking in that clipped, dangerous tone. The opportunity must be secured. No mistakes. Now, hearing it here in front of the people who thought they knew him, I finally felt the veil fall away. The man at the head of the table wasn't my father. He was someone else. Someone who had been preparing me for a role I never agreed to play. My phone buzzed again. I lifted the napkin to hide the screen. Now go to your room. Do not warn anyone. Do not look back. My heart hammered so hard it felt like everyone could see it through my sweater. I glanced at Linda. Her knife shook slightly as she served a piece of turkey. She kept her eyes down, but there was a flicker of fear, maybe guilt in her expression. "Emily, honey," my father said suddenly, catching me off guard. His smile was too wide. "Your Aunt Martha wants to hear about your classes. Why don't you share what you've been working on?" The timing. Too perfect. It wasn't about my classes. He was trying to keep me engaged, tethered to the table under his watch. I'll be right back," I stammered, pushing back my chair. "I think I left something on upstairs." Emily, Linda said sharply, her fork-suspended dinner just started. "I'll only be a minute." I forced a smile. "I promise." I rose, legs shaky, and walked toward the staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last. My family's voices blended into a background hum, Lily asking for mashed potatoes. Uncle Charles laughing at his own joke, Aunt Martha scolding him for talking with his mouth full. Normal? Perfectly normal. Except it wasn't. Halfway up the stairs, my father's voice called after me. "Emily." His tone was still warm, but there was an edge beneath it sharp enough to draw blood. "Come back. Your cousin's asking for you." The words slithered up my spine. My phone buzzed in my palm again. "Stay upstairs. Do not respond. He's trying to lure you back." I froze. My father's voice echoed again, louder, more commanding. "Emily, right now." That was the moment it snapped. For months, maybe years, I had been bending myself into shapes that fit his world. I had excused the secrecy, the paperwork he pushed under my nose, the way he looked at me more like a piece of a puzzle than a daughter. I had clung to the hope that somewhere underneath it all, the man I loved still existed. But standing there on the stairs, caught between his call and the FBI's warning, I understood. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't guiding me. He was setting me up. All those documents, I signed the questions he asked about my accounts, my schedule, my social security number. They weren't harmless. They were threads in a web designed to strangle me when the time came. And that time was now. The realization cut deeper than any betrayal I'd ever imagined. This wasn't favoritism or neglect or even cruelty. This was my father planning my death to save himself. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. Something inside me went very still. I turned and walked up the rest of the stairs, each step a declaration. I realized they would never change. The only thing left to change was me. At the top of the stairs, the house felt like it belonged to someone else. The warm light from the dining room below didn't reach here. Shadows stretched across the hallway, and the muffled laughter of my relatives sounded distant, almost unreal. I pressed myself against the wall, my phone clutched so tightly it hurt. The screen still glowed with the FBI's message, "Stay upstairs. Do not respond." My father called again, his voice sharp now. "Emily, don't be rude. Come back and sit with the family." I closed my eyes. For years, I had obeyed that voice. Even when it was wrapped in disappointment, even when it pressed me into silence, I had listened. Tonight, I didn't. I stepped into my room, shut the door softly, and for the first time in my life, I chose silence. It wasn't weakness anymore, it was defiance. From the upstairs window, I could see the scene shifting outside. Dark SUVs had appeared on the corners of our street. Men and women in tactical gear moved with quiet precision, fanning out under the cover of the gray Washington evening. I recognized the rhythm of an operation in motion textbook from my criminology lectures, but terrifying when painted across my own neighborhood. My phone rang. The unknown number again. I answered with shaking hands. Emily Carter. The voice was calm, professional female. "Yes," I whispered. "This is Special Agent Karen Lopez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You need to stay calm and do exactly as I say. We're about to execute a federal warrant on your home. Do not go downstairs. Your father is armed and he's expecting this." The words sank into me like ice water. Armed. Expecting this. What do you mean, Emily? Your father has been using your identity to create shell companies. He's laundering money from illegal arms sales under your name. If we hadn't intercepted his plan, he would have made you the fall person. And worse, our evidence shows he intended to eliminate you tonight to close the loop. I thought I'd be able to scream something. Instead, my whole body went quiet like I'd stepped outside myself. "You're saying my father wants to kill me." "We have recordings," Agent Lopez replied softly. "He sees you as a liability. But you're not alone anymore. We're here. We'll protect you." Her words wrapped around me like armor, even as my chest ached. Downstairs, the conversation continued almost normally. Aunt Martha's laughter carried faintly, followed by the clinking of silverware. My father's voice rose above the rest, too cheerful, too rehearsed. He was performing for them, buying time, keeping up the image of a doting patriarch while outside the FBI was circling. "Agent Lopez," I whispered Linda, my stepmother, "she's been so nervous. She knows something, doesn't she?" A pause. Then, "Yes. She's been working with us for months. She risked everything to protect you." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Linda, the woman who scolded me for textbooks on the counter, who snapped at me for being distracted, had been carrying a secret even heavier than mine. All her clipped words, her shaking hands, her watchful eyes, they weren't just hostility, they were fear. "She's been providing us with documents, recordings, financial records," Lopez continued. "Without her, we may not have gotten to you in time." I sank onto the edge of my bed, the phone pressed against my cheek. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the smallest flicker of control return to me. My silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was strategy. I didn't warn my family downstairs. I didn't shout or explain. I let the performance continue, the perfect dinner, the laughter, the toast, while the storm gathered outside. And then it broke. The front door crashed open, the sound reverberating through the floorboards like a cannon blast. Shouts followed loud and commanding. FBI, federal agents. Everyone on the ground, chairs scraped, voices screamed. Aunt Martha shrieked in confusion. Uncle Charles shouted something incoherent, and Lily's phone clattered to the floor. My father's voice thundered in protest, the charm gone, replaced with rage. But Linda's voice cut through it, all calm and steady. Thomas, they know everything. I froze, listening. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't surprised. She was ready. That single line was the trap snapping shut. I imagined my father's face in that moment, the dawning realization that the woman beside him hadn't been a pawn, but the player who had set the board. Downstairs, the chaos raged on agents, shouting commands, boots pounding across hardwood, the clatter of dishes hitting the floor. But in my room, I remained still listening, my silence louder than any scream I could have given. For years, I had been invisible at family dinners, forgotten in celebrations, treated as an afterthought. Tonight, my absence at the table was my weapon. They finally realized something was slipping from their hands. The sound from below was chaos. Boots thudded across the hardwood. Metal clinked as silverware and glassware toppled from the table. FBI voices thundered commands. Hands where we can see them. On the ground now, I pressed my back against the bedroom wall, every nerve in my body electrified. The house that had always been a polished stage, set a place of perfect dinners and careful smiles, was unraveling in seconds. Through the din, I heard my father's voice rise. Richard Carter, the consummate host, the doting patriarch. His tone was furious, now booming with outrage. "This is a mistake. You've got the wrong man." But even in his protest, there was calculation. His voice carried not just to the agents, but to my aunt, my uncle, my cousin. He was building his defense before their eyes, planting seeds of doubt. "Linda," he barked suddenly, tell them they've got it wrong." For a heartbeat silence. Then Linda's voice, steadier than I'd ever heard it. "No, Richard. They don't have it wrong. They have everything." The words landed like a hammer blow. "You recorded me." My father's voice cracked with disbelief, then roared with venom. "You treacherous, after everything I gave you." I could picture his face red with fury, veins standing out on his neck. But what chilled me wasn't his anger. It was the desperation threading through it. Because he knew. The walls were closing in. Downstairs, Aunt Martha was crying, her voice breaking. "What is happening? What are you people doing in our home?" Uncle Charles shouted at the agents. "This is outrageous. He's a businessman, not a criminal." And then my father pounced on it like a wolf scenting weakness. "Exactly," Richard thundered. "I've spent my life providing for this family. Emily goes to college because of me. There's food on this table because of me. And this is how I'm repaid." Lies, betrayal. My own wife turning against me. The guilt trip was surgical. Every word sharpened to pierce. He wasn't just fighting the FBI, he was fighting for the loyalty of everyone else in that room. For Aunt Martha and Uncle Charles, who had always admired his success. For Lily, who looked up to him as the uncle with the shiny cars and big stories. And for me. Even upstairs out of sight, I felt the weight of his performance pressing on me like a chain. He knew I was listening. He always knew how to make me listen. "Emily," he shouted suddenly, his voice booming up the staircase. "Sweetheart, come down here. Tell them who I am. Tell them your father is a good man." My blood turned cold. This was the blade he'd kept sharpened my whole life, using his role as my father like a weapon, reminding me of every bedtime story, every bike ride, every time he'd held my hand when I was small. But I stayed silent. For the first time in 21 years, I let his words fall into the emptiness and stay there. "Emily," his tone sharpened, furious now. "Don't you dare stay up there and let them do this to me. I am your father. You owe me that." Those words cut deep because once I would have believed them. Once I thought I owed him everything. But upstairs in the stillness of my room, I felt something shift. I didn't owe him anything. Not my silence. Not my loyalty. Not my life. Agent voices overlapped downstairs. "Suspect is restrained. Secure the perimeter. Collect evidence." The thud of boots, continued drawers opening, furniture scraping. And still my father raged, his voice breaking through. "Linda, you don't understand. They'll take everything. The business, the house. You'll be nothing without me." Linda's answer was firm, unflinching. "I'd rather be nothing than a murderer's wife." A strangled noise tore from him. Whether it was fury or grief, I couldn't tell. And then quieter, more insidious came the gaslighting. "Emily," he called again, softer now, almost tender. "Don't let them twist your mind. You know me. You know I'd never hurt you. Everything I've done was for you, for your future. Don't throw me away because of lies." The cruelty of it hit harder than the shouting. He was trying to rewrite reality as it collapsed around him, dragging me back into his story as if nothing had changed. I gripped my phone until my knuckles whitened. He was wrong. I did know him. Just not in the way he wanted. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not the father who held me when I cried, not the businessman who provided, but the man who forged my name on documents, who planned my death, who would rather kill me than face the consequences of his own choices. His noise grew louder, but my silence grew sharper. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't just a raid. This was the end of his power over me. Every guilt trip, every manipulation, every word designed to keep me small, they were all crumbling with him. The FBI had him in restraints. Linda had trapped him with recordings. And I had trapped him with something even stronger: my refusal to answer. Because without my obedience, without my silence, without me, he was nothing. And so the stage was set for the final strike. When I finally stepped downstairs, the world I had known was gone. The dining room looked like a battlefield dressed in linen. The golden turkey sat half-carved gravy spilled across the tablecloth, Aunt Martha weeping into her hands. Lily clutched her phone like a lifeline, recording nothing, her wide eyes fixed on the men in tactical vests moving briskly through the house. Uncle Charles paced furiously, demanding answers no one gave. And at the head of the table, where he had always ruled, sat Richard Carter, my father. His wrists were zip-tied behind the chair, his face flushed, his shirt collar damp with sweat. And yet somehow, he still managed to arrange his expression into something paternal, almost tender. "Emily," he said when he saw me, his voice dropping into the familiar warmth that used to calm me as a child. "Thank God you're safe. These people, this is a mistake. I can explain everything." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard Agent Lopez, if I hadn't seen the SUVs and tactical teams, I might have believed him. He looked every inch the innocent man the protective father caught in a nightmare. But I wasn't that little girl anymore. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't." For a flicker of a second, his mask slipped. His eyes hardened into something cold and calculating. The man beneath the performance. The man willing to sacrifice his daughter to save himself. Linda stood nearby, guarded by 2 agents. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Richard, it's over. They have the recordings. They have the financial records. They have everything." "You recorded me?" he snarled, his mask tearing. His voice rose with venom. "After everything I did for you, after everything I provided, you were never protecting us," she shot back. "You were protecting yourself, and you were going to kill Emily to do it." The room froze. Even Aunt Martha's sobs went silent. He jerked forward in his chair, veins straining in his neck. It wouldn't have been personal, he said, as if that were some kind of mercy. It would have been quick, painless. She would have died believing her father loved her. The casualness in his voice made me recoil. There it was spoken aloud, the murder he had rehearsed in his head, stripped of disguise. "You were going to kill me," I said, my voice flat. His eyes darted toward me, and for the first time I saw something crack inside him. Not guilt, not remorse, just the failure of control. Agent Lopez stepped forward, her tone firm. "Richard Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, international arms trafficking, money laundering, identity theft, and violations of federal firearms statutes." Her voice cut through the air like a blade. As she began reading him his rights, my father twisted in his restraints. His last card played. Emily, listen to me. This is family business. You don't betray family. Someday you'll understand I did all this for us. I looked him in the eye steady for the first time in my life. Family isn't supposed to kill you, Dad. You taught me the law protects the innocent. Tonight, the law is protecting me from you. His jaw clenched, his chest heaved, but he had no answer. They led him out past the broken table, past the spilled wine and shattered plates, past the family he had deceived for years, out into the waiting dark of Bellevue where floodlights illuminated the truth he could no longer outrun. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. The trial had dragged on for weeks, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial ledgers, shipping manifests, encrypted emails, voice recordings, Linda had risked her safety to gather all of it pointed to Richard Carter as the architect of a massive arms trafficking network. But the evidence that sealed his fate came from me. For hours I testified about the documents he'd made me sign, the credit cards opened in my name, the questions he'd asked about my schedule, my accounts. I described the night of Thanksgiving, the texts, the FBI raid, the moment I realized he was planning my death. The defense tried to paint me as confused, manipulated by federal agents, pressured by a vengeful stepmother. But every time my father's attorney raised his voice, every time he twisted my words, I remembered sitting on those stairs, hearing my father call for me like bait, and I answered with clarity. The prosecutor's closing argument still echoes in me. Richard Carter didn't just betray his country. He betrayed the most sacred trust of all, the bond between a father and daughter. He was willing to murder his own child to protect his crimes. If that isn't guilt beyond doubt, what is? The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice rang clear guilty on all counts. I looked across the courtroom at my father. His face was impassive, his body rigid, but I saw his hands tremble as the judge pronounced his sentence life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As the guards led him away in shackles, he turned once, his voice low, almost pleading. Emily, family isn't always enough. I met his gaze. You're right, but love should be. And real love doesn't involve murder. His eyes widened in shock as if it had never occurred to him that his daughter could be the one to deliver the final word. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and damp, Seattle rain misting the steps. Linda stood beside me, her face drawn but relieved. You're free now, she whispered. Agent Lopez handed me a business card. Emily, if you still want that FBI career, you have my recommendation. The way you've carried yourself, the insight you've given us, you'd be an asset. I stared at the card rain, blurring the ink slightly. Once, my dream of joining the FBI came from idolizing my father. Now it came from defeating him. I slipped the card into my pocket. I'll think about it, but inside, I already knew my answer. They lost me. That was their punishment. Years blurred together after the trial, but the echo of that night never really left me. Richard Carter. My father spent the rest of his life in a federal prison cell. His network collapsed like a house of cards, co-conspirators testifying against each other in exchange for leniency. The money he had laundered, the assets he had hoarded were seized. His name, once associated with business success in Bellevue's tight-knit community, became a whisper laced with shame. For a while, I couldn't say his name without feeling something splinter inside me. The word Dad felt poisoned as though it belonged to someone else's language. He had been both my protector and my predator, and reconciling those two truths was like holding glass shards in my hands. But I learned that healing doesn't always come in the form of forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in the form of reclamation. Linda used what remained of his seized wealth to establish a foundation for victims of trafficking. She poured herself into it, working late into the night, determined to turn his blood money into something that might repair lives instead of destroy them. She never tried to step into the role of mother, and I never asked her to. Instead, we built something quieter, stranger, but real, an alliance forged in survival. One night, while sorting through old family photos, she handed me a picture. It was of me at 6 years old, missing teeth, holding a soccer trophy bigger than my torso. My father's arm was around me in the photo, his smile wide. I used to think this man was the whole world, I whispered. She looked at me, her expression tired but steady. Sometimes the person we think we love is just the mask. You saw the truth. And you survived it. That picture sits in a drawer now, face turned downward. Not destroyed, but not displayed either. A reminder, not a monument. When graduation day came at the University of Washington, I walked across the stage with my head high. My diploma felt heavier than paper, it felt like reclamation. I'd earned it on my own terms, no longer under the shadow of my father's money. Afterward, Agent Karen Lopez approached me. She had kept her promise, writing letters of recommendation, pushing my application forward. 6 months later, I pinned a badge onto my blazer. The FBI's counterterrorism division became my new battlefield. I studied networks of exploitation arms dealers and money launderers who, like my father, hid behind the word family as if it were armor. Every case I helped close, every operation I supported, felt like a thread woven into something larger, something stronger than the lies he tried to stitch me into. At first, I worried I'd always be chasing his ghost, that every arrest, every courtroom testimony would feel like replaying my own story. But with time, I realized it wasn't about him anymore. It was about the people who hadn't yet been betrayed, about saving them from voices like his. That was my revenge, not to punish him further, but to deny his shadow a place in my future. Years later, I got the call. Richard Carter had died alone in prison. No ceremony, no family at his side, just a line in a warden's report, filed and forgotten. I sat with that news for a long time, waiting for grief or rage or even relief. What came instead was something unexpected: silence. He had taught me through cruelty and betrayal the power of silence. He used it to control me, to suffocate me, but I reclaimed it, reshaped it, turned it into my shield and my weapon. And now that silence was peace. I returned once to the Bellevue house long after Linda had sold it. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. Kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac, their laughter ringing out in the cool Washington air. I stood at the curb, staring at the windows where I once studied my father's shadow through the blinds. The home looked ordinary again, like any other suburban house. No trace of the storm that had erupted within its walls. I bent down and placed a small object on the sidewalk, my father's old fountain pen, the one he used to sign all those documents, the one he once pressed into my hand, and said, "Someday, this will be yours." I left it there and walked away. That was my symbolic victory, returning what he tried to brand me with, refusing to carry it forward. I don't know if wounds like mine ever heal completely. Some nights I still dream of that Thanksgiving table, the sound of his voice calling my name like bait. But when I wake, I know the difference now. I know that love is not control, that loyalty is not obedience, and that silence, when chosen, can be the loudest answer of all. The echo of his absence is the loudest sound in my life, and in that echo I found freedom. If you've ever carried the weight of family secrets, if you've ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, you are not alone. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the people closest to us can cut the deepest, and sharing these stories reminds us that survival is its own kind of justice.